We're kind of well into October, and although you wouldn't know it as I'm in shorts and a t-shirt at the moment, and I'm hiding out in the shade of our sorghum plants, Mennonite sorghum, which are getting pretty close, But I'm actually not here to talk about those. I'm here to talk about these plants that are in front of me. And this is something that I think probably everybody is familiar with, have heard of, have eaten in some manner or another, but probably have never thought about growing, and that's soybeans. Not something people typically think of as an addition to the homestead garden, but they have a really long history of being basically exactly that, a subsistence type crop. Of course, in more modern times, they're an industrial crop, but there are still lots of older varieties which are very well suited for sort of growing in a homestead manner. So I'm going to take and show you what we've got to work with here. So here they are. You can see basically these are like prime for harvesting. They've died back. They've gone completely brown and hard, and we've had a fortunate little stint with no rain. And I think we have 3 or 4 rows here. It's not a very big patch that we planted this year. We kind of did this as an experiment, and it seems to have worked out fairly well so far. In typical us fashion, we've let the weeds kind of run rampant here, but I don't want to say that they've outcompeted the soybeans, because the soybeans have actually produced quite well. As one sort of tip, soybeans, if you're harvesting them, if you do grow them and you do harvest them, you notice I'm wearing gloves. As you saw in the one little close-up there earlier, they have hairs on them, and those hairs can be kind of irritating when they're dry. So not necessarily something you want to do with your bare hands. You can, but a lot of people will get like a bit of a rashy type reaction to it. It's nothing horrible, but just be aware. I'm actually going to put on a long sleeve shirt too before I get doing this. But yeah, it's essentially, on a smaller patch like this, it's essentially as easy as harvesting dry beans. All cleared out, or at least enough for access. And this is going to be really a simple harvest, because it's just a case of pulling these plants out, pulling the pods off them, kind of harvesting as I clean this section of the garden, and basically all but I see one that still has some green leaves on it, so I might leave that one. But all these are at their end of life anyway, so it's one of the joys of soybeans. They're all ready pretty much at the same time, and you really don't do much aside from plant and harvest, which is kind of nice. Very easy plant to harvest from. It's as simple as ripping the plant out, pulling the pods off, and rinsing and repeating on the next plant. Obviously, on a commercial scale, this makes them completely unfeasible, but from a home scale, they're relatively easy to process. Now I could, at this point, if I wanted to, I could take them out of the pod. I'm not going to from a time perspective, because my really only concern right now is to get them out while it's dry. That is a huge thing to remember with dry beans, soybeans. A lot of these, I'm going to say, I don't know what the proper term is. They're not grains, but they're like these legumes that you can harvest. Is you want to do it when it's dry, because if you do that, you can put this in a dry spot in the house and really come back to it at any point in time. You do not have to take this to completion right now, which is great, because obviously there's a lot of other things producing right now and being harvested from the garden that require a bit more attention to keep them from spoiling. So when you have a few crops like this that only take you a little while to just kind of get it out of the garden, that's kind of a nice thing to spread that garden work out. over a year, as opposed to have everything need your attention all at the same time. As you can see, nothing fancy at all. They come off quite easily. This particular variety is called Gaia, which I don't know the full history on it, but I believe it is a Canadian variety. I could be wrong on that, but we've grown it in the past, and we've grown a couple soybean varieties in the past, and most of the time we've tried to grow them in raised beds because it's always an afterthought. We basically have the seeds. It's never been a priority, and we've usually not had the in-ground space by the time we get around to planting these. So this year we had some in-ground space, and I will say the performance on these in the in-ground space is astronomical compared to in the raised bed. These have really produced well with essentially zero care. We may have watered this garden once. So they're a very thrifty crop, that is for sure. But anyways, I'm going to keep going and make some headway on this patch and come back when I've got it completely harvested. Well, all harvested, and I was making the joke that I harvested that triple row of soybeans in less time than it took my neighbor to mow their lawn. And I got food. But we'll show you what we got here. So there are all the pods. And you can see, I can do this without knocking them down, they're green and kind of blackish colored soybean, which is kind of interesting. So as I said, these are Gaia soybeans, and they're pretty prolific. Now, not everything was completely dry. The last couple, which were on the south-facing side, are the ones that have split. We're going to take these to the greenhouse and set them out to dry a little further. There's the harvest all laid out. A good number of these will probably split on their own out in the heat. Like I said earlier in the video, this can just go on the back burner. We're going to put them in the greenhouse. It'll stay nice and warm in there. They can keep drying. And we're probably going to forget about them for a while and come back to them later on when we've grown soybeans for a few years, but we've never got enough to do anything with other than replant. So this will be the first year where we've actually got enough soybeans there to do some cooking with, which is pretty awesome. Now, we've never cooked with them, and I do know, with the exception of apparently ruminants, you can't feed uncooked soybeans to animals. So this is, for the most part, unless we want to cook them for the animals, this is a harvest for us, basically for the humans of the farm. There's a couple different ways to look at this. One way to look at it is, it really wasn't that many beans. I mean, we don't know exactly how many, but they're fairly small. It doesn't look all that impressive, and from a weight perspective, it's not going to amount to a massive, massive haul of produce. But weight isn't the only sort of metric to be looking at here with food that you can produce. Obviously, soybeans are very, very high in protein, which from a plant perspective, that's pretty awesome, because protein is usually the hardest thing to come by or the most expensive thing to produce, i.e. animals are full of protein, but they're not as cheap as plants to produce. There's different ways to look at this. In one side of the fence, we'd have to grow a lot of soybeans to use them as sort of the principal protein source in our diet. And without machinery, that probably really wouldn't be feasible. However, we can grow more than enough soybeans to supplement some of our dishes and diets with. So you don't really treat them, or we're thinking anyways, is that we won't treat them as like a principal, heavy producing main crop that is a staple in our diet. But this is more of like an additive. And when you look at it that way, there's quite a bit of value sitting in this little black tub beside me. And on top of that, when you're gardening, it's always nice to have things that you can use in rotations. So for us, our sort of main crops are really, really heavy on the Solanaceae family, like tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants, that sort of stuff. And that's because, let's face it, they are astronomical producers. They are a powerhouse as far as return on investment. But it's still good practice to move them around. And you need things to go in their place. So things like soybeans, obviously squashes, some of the root vegetables, etc., those make really nice things to follow around sort of those main crop plants if you're doing crop rotation. So something like this can fill a pretty good void in your garden if you're moving your crops around year to year, where you maybe can't squeeze in some potatoes or you can't squeeze in some tomatoes because you want to keep that rotation sort of spacing by time. So why not fill it with something like soybeans? As we just have shown, they're pretty much a plant it and forget it type of crop. You really don't have to do anything. And on the other end, you get a relatively high value food item in the bean. The next part is figuring out exactly what to do with that bean.